All right, we'll continue our discussion of the graph of a straight line, but this will, of course, apply to any graph. It's important to remember that graphs are drawn on the Cartesian plane, and therefore what generally applies to other graphs in terms of interpretation will apply to other graphs. So I want to answer the question, for which values of x is f of x greater or equal to 0? And I'm going to stick to this question and leave the second one for the next video. Now, we want to know, and this is important because you want to understand the question, for which values of x is f of x, which is y, is greater than 0, and greater than 0 we know that it means positive. And we also want to know where it is equal to 0. So let's check in terms of our graph, where will f of x be greater or equal to 0? Now you can see the red line here. This is where the graph is above the x-axis, and this corresponds to the y-axis being positive. But now the question wants the values of x that corresponds to this, the values of x that correspond to this part. And if you look at along this black line here, and the arrow showing that it goes on to the right forever, we know that all values on the right of 0 will be greater or equal to 0. So x is greater or equal to 0 is the answer. And we say or equal to 0 because we include the origin as per question, which required that y will also be equal to 0 at some point. But we could also write this as x is, in terms of the interval notation, x is an element of 0, and look at the square bracket showing that 0 is included up to infinity, and look at the open bracket here where it shows that infinity is not included, and generally this is the case with infinity all the time. I really prefer this set notation form because it makes my life easy. I don't have to remember the brackets. I just have to write x is greater or equal to 0. But if you are used to this notation where you have to write it in this form, then it's what you prefer, and make sure that you write it correctly all the time. Now we answer the second question. For which values of x is f of x less than 0? Once again, we want to understand the question. The question is saying y, which is f of x, is less than 0, which means we're looking at where y is negative. And we also want to know where it is equal to 0. So we want to know where is y negative and where is y equal to 0. And we are referring to the x-axis that correspond to that part of the graph. And of course, we click here and to see which part of this graph is below the x-axis where y is negative. And we can see here the blue graph that we have, it is part that correspond to the y values that are below the x-axis. But our answer is the x-axis. So our answer is the x values that correspond to the graph that is below the x-axis. And you can see it says x is less or equal to 0, or equal to 0 because we have included 0. Had the question said f of x is less than 0, then we would only have the answer as x is less than 0. But in this case, because it includes y being equal to 0, then our answer will be x is less or equal to 0. And of course, it goes all the way to the left along the x-axis. We can write our answer like we did with the first question in set notation, in interval notation, as x is an element of from minus infinity to 0. Now look at the open bracket again. This is from minus infinity because we don't really have a number that is minus infinity. And 0, we know that 0 is included in the solution, hence we've got the closed bracket like this here. And this is of course the set notation, which says we're looking at values of x such that x is less or equal to 0, and this gives the same answer as the interval notation. But what is important is you must use what you think is you are familiar with. Make sure you are correct all the time. I don't like remembering the brackets, but in some cases you'll be given information in these brackets and you must be able to interpret it.